Well, welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 4 of The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, Caspian versus a whole lot of bureaucracy.
Red tape edition.
Yeah. No, this is chapter 4, What Caspian Did There, which, I mean, I'm not trying to just come out, guns a-blazing, but that is a terrible chapter title. Well, maybe you like it. I think it's quite
Kind of
bland.
fits some of the other titles.
Yeah, that's true. Look, I'm already realizing I spoke a little too harshly. I do kind of like it. Maybe it's got this like mystery of it of what did Caspian do there, and it tells you what it's going to be about, but gives you no details. So that is kind of nice.
That is pretty good.
But yeah, there's a lot of bureaucracy here, more than I ever thought there would be in Narnia. So it's interesting. I didn't realize I'd be reading that much about local government here in a Narnia book.
Right. We'll hopefully talk about this when we get there, but I think the whole only 1 hour on a Saturday night thing is hilarious and so accurate.
No, but I actually read this chapter while at the DMV, and I thought it was divine providence that I would be there reading about there's just, let's just, I don't know, maybe I have listeners that work at the DMV, so let's just say I made some connections. Well, Phil, any updates or anything before we jump into this chapter here?
Not for me. How about from you?
No. Oh, well, I just thought about this. We're in a new studio.
You've probably noticed that the sound is a little richer.
Yeah.
A little more nuanced.
We have
a dedicated podcasting studio now. I'll just say it.
Yeah, that's exactly what the spare bedroom in my house is.
Yep. We have a Star Wars pillowcase bed, and
this is where I'm allowed to keep my Star Wars pillows. Yep. It's they've
been relegated to the podcasting.
Exactly. So, listeners, just bear with us. We are recording in a new place, and so if the sound isn't quite right, we're getting there. We're still trying to learn, and so hopefully this will be fine. But we were recording for so long in my dining room, which is really not a great place to record.
Not ideal.
So no one complained then. So maybe they just didn't listen enough to even get to the email address or anything. So those listeners already tuned out. Yeah. Although you and I were just talking in the green room, if you will, before we started recording.
Yes.
And
right after hanging out in the lounge.
Yeah. I've gone back and listened to some of our season 1 episodes, and there is I yell a lot. Like I'm just talking very loudly in a lot of this because we were both recording in our closets and an opposite.
And
like
something about
over
being
Google
in
Hangouts,
different locations makes you want to yell.
It did.
Yeah.
And just it wasn't the same kind of sound quality. So hopefully, listeners, if you stuck with us through to this 3rd season, you're reaping the benefits of better sound quality. And also thank you to our patrons who've helped make that possible by us being able to buy better equipment. So yeah. All right, I think people have had enough look behind the curtain. So let's go ahead and jump into this chapter. Last time in chapter 3, the crew of the Dawn Treader, they explored the Lone Islands. And our protagonists, some of them were kidnapped, and Caspian met the Lord Byrne. And so, Phil, why don't you go ahead and pick us up with chapter 4?
Okay, here's a summary for chapter 4. Caspian orders every man to prepare for entry into the governor's grounds. On their way, more and more people join the group as news of the king's presence spreads throughout the town. At the castle gate, they force their way past the doorkeeper. Once in the hall, and moving fast to prevent resistance, they take action and flip the table on Governor Gumpus and demand payment of the 150 years of back taxes they owe, as well as the end of slavery on the islands. When these demands are not met, they relieve the governor of his duties, place Byrne in his place as a lord, and make their way to the market to stop the slave trade. The children and Reepicheep are reunited with Caspian, with not much appreciation from Eustace, and the ship is reloaded with supplies with the intent to sail east in search of adventure.
There is no way that was only 150 words.
It was hard. This one was difficult
I
because I had to get it down from 179, and the chapters are getting longer.
They are. Were you actually under 150?
149.
That's crazy. That was good. So much happened in this chapter. That was a really good. What
the key is to be concise.
That's nice. What were some of your takeaways here?
Well, I'm really excited to talk about the bureaucracy
Mm-hmm.
part. I love how there was quite a bit packed into this. They just kind of march in and things start happening. We have an entire crowd form in one paragraph.
Yeah.
A lot of apparent obstructions get blasted out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty fun. And right at the end, you kind of think, oh, maybe they're not going to seek adventure after all.
Yeah.
But then he's like, but how could I?
Yeah.
Like, how could I?
say
How
no to
could
Rikushi,
I?
too?
What am I going to say to Rivichu?
Exactly.
And it's kind of like, okay, we're off to the races again.
And this was a really fun chapter. I think you and I were a little down on chapter 3. Not that it was a bad chapter, but just it was so much setting up.
Yeah.
And
I think the
payoffs-
setup chapters are difficult for you because you want to get to the fun stuff.
Yeah, I'm not a very patient man. But the payoff here so great. Definitely
Very
was
good.
worth it. I really like it. Yeah, my biggest takeaway, I love the humor in this chapter. I love C.S. Lewis just kind of poking fun at all of the monotonous bureaucracy here. The Byrne, I think, really shines here in this chapter. Caspian, really, this is like his coming out party here. I mean, he is the king, and it's great to see him in action. These last couple of chapters, Caspian has just really not been much of a different character than, in the last book. But this is a different character, and this is good character development, and it's just wonderful. It really is.
Caspian's changed a lot in 3 years.
He really has.
Yeah. He's grown into his role.
Yeah. So let's start going through this kind of bit by bit here. The chapter begins after the Lord Byrne. They all have breakfast together. I just feel like food is more valued in Narnia than it is in our world. They always seem to have time for a meal here, and I love that. But they have breakfast together, and they, like you said, they get a crowd together at Narrowhaven, and they start walking towards the castle. And this crowd just continues to form. And C.S. Lewis kind of gives you why each group of people, he kind of like sections each of them off as like the older women and the younger men, and kind of tells you why did you enjoy that as you're all learning?
I did it, the order in which it built up.
Okay.
Just like one group joins because of the group before them. They want to go see that group. And then another group that wants to see them follows. Very well organized.
They're quite like lemmings, I feel like. They just like, there's some people following other people. Let's just hop in line and get excited.
But I also thought, let's say a crowd was forming on the streets. I would run outside and I would ask someone, hey, what's going on? If they told me, I'd be like, okay, everyone else is going. Let's go.
Oh, I'm the opposite. I'm going to lock my doors if a crowd, like, just because I'm like, I don't know what's going on out there. I'm going to be like suspicious.
That is totally not true.
You think I would go out and
You would
enjoy?
totally be curious, and you would probably know about it beforehand. You'd probably be the one leading the group.
Yeah, maybe.
You have woo.
Have you ever done the Strengths Finder?
Yeah, I do not have woo.
Oh, that is actually one of mine.
Yeah. No, I know it is. That's why I said it.
Oh, you know me so well. So as this happens, they get to the gate. And by the way, there is I say this all the time, there is a wonderful illustration here by Pauline Baines.
Hold it up.
Yep.
Let's see
and
it.
I'll try my best to put it in the episode's description.
Man, I got to get me a Kindle copy.
We can do that. It's not that hard.
We do have patrons now.
Yeah. Also, it's like $2, often on sale. But it's a really cool picture. And so, listeners, I haven't looked yet. It is the further we get into these books, the harder it is for me to find the illustrations just on Google. I could usually find like Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe ones. But I will try my best to find this. The crowd that is formed in this picture is absolutely enormous. I think we're told there's only about 30 men on Caspian ship, and there's easily hundreds in this picture. And it just further goes to our point that although Baines' illustrations are wonderful and beautiful, they are definitely not canonical.
Wait, hold it up again.
Look at this thing, man. There's hundreds of people there.
That is more than would fit on a ship. It's
Yeah.
not hundreds.
Well, I mean, there's other people are joining, but there's definitely 100 like soldiers with all full regalia, if you will. So I'm going to go ahead and read this portion of the text here as Caspian and the rest of his crew approach the castle gate. At the castle gate, Caspian's trumpeter blew a blast and cried, "Open for the King of Narnia, come to visit his trusty and well-beloved servant, the governor of the Lone Islands." In those days, everything in the islands was done in a slovenly and slouching manner. Only the little postern opened, and out came a tousled fellow with a dirty old hat on his head instead of a helmet, and a rusty old pike in his hand. He blinked at the flashing figures before him. "Carnsee's efficiency," he mumbled, which was his way of saying, "You can't see his sufficiency." No interviews without appointments except between 9 and 10 p.m. second Saturday every month. Uncover before Narnia, you dog, thundered the Lord Byrne, and dealt him a rap with his gauntleted hand, which sent his hat flying from his head.
What a great sentence. Dealt him a rap with a gauntleted hand.
This is
That's
the kind of
so
stuff
good.
I would love in my my 6th grade composition class, to get my students together and go through the language just here. I mean, this is some great vocabulary here. I mean, this is what I love about Lewis. This is a book written for children, but this really expands vocabulary. Just his prose here, the way he's writing is just really beautiful, and I'm really just taken aback at how great of not just a storyteller, but how great of an actual writer Lewis is. We know that's true, but I'm always
Here's
surprised.
more evidence of why it's true. Yeah.
And the humor here is wonderful. I mean, everything about this is just so fun.
Let's talk about the time. I didn't realize this until the second read, but it's not between 9 and 10 p.m. on a Saturday night.
Yeah, you like that?
I just can't imagine they're even open.
No, I mean, the whole point is they're just not. Do not come to us with your complaints, because we're not going to hear them.
Yeah.
I love this. I love this idea that the Lone Islands has just become this place that Narnia has forgotten, and so they've kind of just done their own thing. And we'll get to this when we talk about Gumpus, the governor, in a minute. But it's at this point, it's not problematic more than it just is funny and annoying, right? It's going to become much more of a problem in a minute. But here you're just like, you're laughing along with, like, this is ridiculous. Like, how does this place function?
It's the kind of thing that it stops anything from happening as long as the party setting the rules maintains power, but they're about to lose that power.
And they're in big trouble, yeah. So what happens next, Phil?
Well, then they get past that system, kind of force their way in.
Yeah. We see the group of, like, the governor's guards who are lounging, and they're in lots of disgraceful conditions, or at least their armor is, and there just really isn't much to them. Caspian even talks about, we want to have a party, or we want to celebrate our arrival. And really the only thing that the men remember is he's like, yeah, let's get out a cask of wine to drink to our health. And that's really the only thing these guys pick up on. And so you really just have come to a very apathetic and lazy island where there's really not much doing. It's like, what would happen if the Shire went wrong? You know what I mean? It's like, it's some of that just desire for comfort just taken to the extreme, I feel like, here.
Yeah.
So, Phil, then Caspian and his group of Narnians, they make their way into the next hall where Gumpus is. And what is that exchange like?
So here, exact same thing. He repeats the same line. No interviews without appointments except between 9 and 10 on second Saturdays. He just kind of glances up and then looks back down and he doesn't even bother to...
He's so used to not having to deal with anyone from the outside world. Just, I'm going to be able to do my thing. I have pretty much complete autonomy here, and nobody can change that.
Right. They just pick up the table and they flip it on him.
Oh, yeah.
So good. And I wondered if you thought this too, but it echoes what Jesus did when he goes into the temple. I really like that. But, again, it's not a one-to-one thing, but it definitely
I don't know if Lewis himself is trying to make any kind of point to Christ's cleansing of the temple, but there definitely is that imagery that is from. I mean, if you grew up in a Christian household or spend enough time around church,
you've probably flipped the table.
Well, yeah, whenever you think of flipping tables, you go back to that, and there is definitely a connection between what was happening in the temple in Jerusalem to what's happening here in the Lone Islands, which the Lone Islands, there is now trafficking of slaves. Yeah. There is just this total just apathy that runs throughout the islands. Nothing is really getting done. And this place, this governor and his court or people that are supposed to be helping take care of the Lone Islanders really have completely neglected their own people to just benefit themselves. And so in the same way that, like, there is an unjust thing happening here, right? The same thing is happening at the temple, where the Gentiles are being, that space that was used for them in the temple, that's where all the people have set up their shop, and therefore keeping out, all of the Gentiles on that outer part of the temple. So there definitely is a really great connection there.
So let's read this next part.
Oh yeah,
And it starts out, "My Lord," and it's really hard, having seen episode 1 as many times as I saw it as a kid, to say it in a normal voice. So bear with me.
No one's gonna get that reference.
A few people will. That one's for you.
Keep moving on.
So this is Caspian at the beginning. "My lord," said he, fixing his eyes on Gumpus, "you have not given us quite the welcome we expected. I am the king of Narnia."
Wait, pause. Does yours really say I'm the king of Narnia?
Mm-hmm.
Mine says we are the king of Narnia.
Whoa.
I'm not kidding. Listeners, the Narnia podcast at gmail.com, let us know. I legitimately did not know. I know we've talked about changes in the Dawn Treader.
Oh, the phones are blowing up. We might have a few calls coming in right now. Well, mine says they.
Mine says we are the king of Narnia.
Wow.
Here. So we'll have to look into this. Maybe we'll do some follow-ups at the beginning of chapter 5 next time. We definitely have some different stuff written here.
That's interesting.
All right, sorry, you keep going.
I'm going to go with the correct version. Although my books are not in the correct order. I'm jumping all over the place. "My lord," said he, fixing his eyes on Gumpus, "you have not given us quite the welcome we expected. I am the king of Narnia." "Nothing about it in the correspondence," said the governor. "Nothing about it in the minutes. We have not been notified of any such thing. All irregular. Happy to consider any applications. And we are come to inquire into your sufficiency's conduct of your office," continued Caspian. "There are 2 points especially on which I require an explanation. Firstly, I find no record that the tribute due from these islands to the crown of Narnia has been received for about 150 years. "That would be a question to raise at the council next month," said Gumpus. "If anyone moves that a commission of inquiry be set up to report on the financial history of the islands at the first meeting next year, why then I also find it clearly written in our laws," Caspian went on, "that if the tribute is not delivered, the whole debt has to be paid by the governor of the Lone Islands out of his private purse." At this, Gumpus began to pay real attention.
I love this idea that Gumpus was about to jump into this long spiel of how he was going to like file all these different reports to finally get his motion brought up at the thing. Because he says, oh, well, if anyone moves the commission of inquiry to be set up to report on the financial history of the islands at the first meeting next year, like that's not even the actual complaint. He's like, here's how you file the desire to get a complaint read. I mean, right. This is really
Just
funny.
Bury them in paperwork.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Gumpus here, because I think on first read, he can just be a funny character who's more silly than he is anything else. But I think if we really delve into here, I think there's a lot more here. So my first question to you, Phil, is do we think that Gumpus is a bad guy?
He's in a role of power, and he's allowing bad things to happen.
Yeah.
When he has the power to stop them. I guess this kind of gets philosophically loaded, but it seems like he's not a good guy.
Yeah. I would definitely agree. It reminds me of Pontius Pilate. I know as a kid, I always struggled with this idea. So if you think about like the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed, and like Pilate's name is in both of those, right? That like he suffered under Pontius Pilate in the Apostles' Creed. And this idea of like, as a kid, I was like, that doesn't seem fair. They don't even put Judas's name in there. They put Pilate's name in there, and all he did was just let this happen. Yeah. And as a kid, I didn't realize the whole idea of like he let this happen, right? And so it seems as if Gumpus's real sin is his apathy or his complacency as these horrible things are happening. He just lets it happen. He's not necessarily the one who is trafficking slaves, but he's well aware that it's happening under his watch. He has a platform and an ability to stop bad things from happening, and he just looks the other way.
I don't know if he is necessarily actively doing bad things. Mm-hmm. Except for he's actively putting stuff in place to prevent anything good from happening. Mm-hmm. That seems pretty bad.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily helpful to make it a dichotomy between he's a good or bad guy. The world's complicated. But what a great character. He's a really fun character here. It's a bummer we only get him for this one chapter. He is a fun character to read about. So in this exchange between Gumpus and Caspian, as they go back and forth, Caspian brings up that secondly, you have permitted this abominable and unnatural traffic in slaves to grow up here, contrary to the ancient custom and usage of our dominions. And wow.
His response.
Oh, you feel that?
Well, especially,
growing up in the American South?
Yeah, growing up with the history that America has, and just necessary and unavoidable is his response, and it's so avoidable.
Yeah.
You don't have to enslave people.
And he's talking down to Caspian as if Caspian's desire for justice and righteousness, because that's really what this is. Like, it's a desire for, like, slavery is wrong and you shouldn't be doing this. And he's like, well, like what he even says, tender as you in your tender years, you don't understand this. Sure. And it's, how often do we see this in the real world where, I mean, the Bible talks so clearly about, like, to not look down on youth because of their age. And Caspian's desire for slavery to end is a good and right and godly desire. And yet Gumpus is like, well, you're right in some cases, but see, when you get older, the world's just more complicated. And he's not wrong that when you get older, you learn that the world's more complicated. But one thing that's really sad is that we sometimes make compromises in place that there should be no compromise allowed.
Right.
And as the world does get more complicated, especially as believers, there are things that we don't compromise on, like slavery. Like, that's a really basic one.
And we'll see later with Pug that for him the compromise is, he's like, you're gonna make me poor.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, well, yeah, like you can't have money that you got from selling slaves.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and I really do love the way that Lewis presents this, because it makes it really, this is a complicated thing that Gumpus isn't just like, well, no, I like slavery. And so, like, Gumpus isn't necessarily pro-slavery. He's just not anti-slavery. And when it comes to something as deplorable as owning other humans, being just not pro it isn't good enough. Right. You have to be anti-it. What a wonderful job Lewis has done in creating this character that, I mean, I really wish we did have more time with Gumpus, because he is a much more complicated character than we've really spent time with in Narnia. Like the White Witch, love the White Witch, is just evil for the sake of being evil, as far as we know her as of this book. Mm-hmm. All right. Miraz, he wants to usurp the throne because he wants to usurp the throne and have power. Yeah. Gumpus, in this one chapter, like, his motivations are still a little unclear, but the way he's achieved his power is very complicated and much more mature as far as reading comprehension goes for students to understand this. I love Gumpus. Yeah, sounds weird. You
also said you love the White Witch, so I'm not,
I love
not surprised
Gumpus's
at this point.
character. I really
love the
really
character of the White Witch too.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how Gumpus replies, I have statistics. I have graphs.
Sure.
He's like, you don't understand the economic problem involved. It reminds me of a character in The Great Gatsby, Tom, who he says some very racist stuff, and then he pads it with, or tries to pad it with, I read about all this stuff. It's all very scientific. Mm-hmm. And that is a form of evil right there too, where you're using graphs that have been made a certain way or like skewed to justify something that's very evil.
And I'm not a huge fan of The Great Gatsby, but I really, again, I don't
Here come the letters.
I don't like Tom's character. I think Fitzgerald does such a great job writing him, because he's not this. I mean, he's a white supremacist in the novel, and yet he's not what you would expect, because he went to like an Ivy League school. I don't remember which one it is, but he has this background of knowledge, education, and he uses that to try to prove these deplorable ideas, instead of coming from it as, oh, he's just some kind of like backwoods kind of racist thing. It's like, no, like, he's this extremely educated. And so that's, I really like that as a character, and I love that connection you're making, even though The Great Gatsby is one of the most overrated books in American literature. I don't speak in absolutes though, so you know.
Absolutely never.
Nope. That's the thing. Any of my controversial opinions are probably meaningless to most people, because I say so many things that are very hyperbolic that no one really cares at this point. It's a well written book. It's just not one of my. I have not read it since high school, so maybe I'd feel differently now. Well, at the end of this exchange, Byrne is made the new Duke of the Lone Islands, and the gang all heads over to Pug to save the Pevensies and Eustace. And before we get to this, I'm going to be honest, I forgot they were in this book.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Did you forget? I was like, oh yeah, Edmund and Lucy are here. And it made me think a question that I want us to ask throughout the course of this novel is this: did Edmund and Lucy have to come back? I think there's so much story here with Eustace, obviously. Mm-hmm. But so far, Edmund and Lucy not really done anything except react to Eustace and talk to and like be the kind of vessels for all of Caspian's exposition.
It does feel like this is a very long handoff so far, where we have some characters similar to The Force Awakens, where this is going to be a transition episode. We're going to introduce the new characters through the old characters, connect everything, fill in some old plot holes, and then move on with a new set of characters. And I don't know if Eustace is coming back. Keep in mind, I haven't read all these books.
You don't even know if he makes it out of this alive.
Right, yeah. And he might be dead right now.
Right now, yeah. Well, no, you've finished this chapter, so.
Yeah. I do think that we're only 4 chapters in, so I'm excited to see what happens with Lucy and Edmund.
So yeah, we can come back and just continually ask this question of what is their role? What is the story being told through Edmund and Lucy? Because as we read this only one chapter at a time, I've never even thought about this perspective before. But it just makes me want to ask the question of what is the role that they're playing here, because I've never delved into that before. So Caspian and company arrive at the slave market to free the slaves. And I want to just mention the Lord Byrne here, because he is now the Duke. And I love that Lewis is
just the Duke.
Yeah, Lewis just is the Duke. Hey, remember that a couple pages ago? Now that's his name now. That's all he is.
It took me a while.
And
get used to it.
I wanted to read here. I have my Keys to the Chronicles by Marvin D. Hinton, and I wanted to read a little bit from this book here because there's some really interesting takeaways. And again, listeners, I have really enjoyed this book, The Keys to the Chronicles. So we'll put a link for it in the episode if you want to check this book out. It's a really, really cool book. So Hinton writes this about the 7 lords. The first one they meet is Lord Byrne, who helps them overthrow the rule of Gumpus on the Lone Islands by putting on armor, attacking the sentry, turning over a castle table, and helping to plan the entire campaign. He is the only one of the 7 lords who engages in any sort of warlike activity in the book, a suitable characteristic because, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, Byrne is a 16th century word meaning warrior. This is where it gets really interesting. The parallel between Byrne's name and an Old English word does not mean a similar parallel can be found for each of the lords. After all, as Freud is famous for allegedly noting, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, and sometimes a name is just a name. Lewis delighted in what 17th century poet Robert Herrick called sweet disorder, a characteristic that fellow Inkley member J.R.R. Tolkien considered a severe writing flaw. Had Tolkien written Treader, all the 7 lords would have had parallels to their names, or none would have. Lewis, ever the model of inconsistency, would sometimes pick names for linguistic echoes, sometimes for literary reasons, and sometimes simply because he liked the sounds the letters made. And I love this juxtaposition of Lewis and Tolkien, because that's so true of both of their writings, that Lewis is like, okay, Byrne means something, the rest don't, at least as far as we know, and Tolkien would never have done that. And
everything has to have meaning.
I just wish we knew more. I really wish I could just see that friendship in action, because these two guys were so different and were such good friends. So I think it's a really interesting thing.
Let's talk about Pug and what happens right after they get to Eustace. Pug is so happy to be done with Eustace. He's really upset about losing his entire business of trafficking people, but this is a hilarious twist where he's quite happy to get rid of Eustace. Yes. He even tried to include him free with other slaves.
Well, yeah, I'll go ahead and read it.
Let's read it.
Caspian says, "But where's my other friend?" "Oh, him?" said Pug. "Oh, take him and welcome. Glad to have him off my hands. I've never seen such a drug in the market in all my born days. Priced him at 5 crescents in the end, and even so nobody'd have him. Threw him free with other lots, and still no one would have him. Wouldn't touch him. Wouldn't look at him. Tax, bring out Sulky." And Sulky is capitalized as a proper noun, as a nickname. And this is funny. I mean, as funny as obviously something of this serious magnitude can be, but Eustace just is insufferable to everyone. And that's quite a fun way to reintroduce him after he's been gone for about a chapter and a half now. It's just this idea of he's hated by everybody. The good guys don't like him. The bad guys don't like him.
And it's also odd that he's it sounds like he was hurt that he wasn't sold because no one wanted him. I think it's really the no one wanting him part that was so galling to him.
Yeah, and that's, again, it's kind of a double thing that's happening here where Lewis is playing that off for laughs, right? This idea that it's even more galling to be he's a utility whom no one wants. Mm-hmm. But also this idea of, well, what does that mean for Eustace? Because the character that he has played, the persona, the facade, is that he doesn't really care what other people think because he's so much better than everyone else that it doesn't matter what those lowly people think of him. And yet we get a little glimpse inside of his head here, knowing that he's actually very upset. Yeah. One, he's upset because he's being trafficked, and obviously he should be upset about that. But there's also this weird part of him that's upset because no one even wants him in the midst of this terrible thing.
And his line is so... His spirit has not been broken.
No.
He says, I see. As usual, been enjoying yourself somewhere while the rest of us were prisoners. Suppose you haven't even found out about the British Council. Of course not. And that little addition of the of course not, I just imagine him turning away, crossing his arms, and refusing to listen to anything.
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating even just reading that line, because I think we've all encountered people like that. Where
oh, yeah.
I'm not even going to listen.
So all of this is wrapped up here in the slave market, and then the Dawn Treader begins preparing for its next part of its voyage. And there's this excitement here that as we're preparing for this voyage, that the real adventure hasn't even started. And you're like, if you're like, man, like, this was really fun already. You mean the real thing hasn't happened yet? This is great.
A really good point, because we're 4 chapters in. We've already had quite a bit of fun.
Yeah. Let me go ahead and read the very last bit of this chapter for us. Byrne could only tell them that he had seen his 6 companions sail away eastward, and that nothing had ever been heard of them again. He said this when he and Caspian were standing on the highest point of Avra, looking down on the eastern ocean. I've often been up here of a morning, said the Duke, and seen the sun come up out of the sea, and sometimes it looked as if it were only a couple of miles away. And I've wondered about my friends, and wondered what there really is behind that horizon. Nothing, most likely. Yet I am always half ashamed that I stayed behind. But I wish your majesty wouldn't go. We may need your help here. This closing the slave market might make a new world. War with Calormen is what I foresee. My liege, think again. I have an oath, my lord Duke, said Caspian. And anyway, what could I say to Reepicheep? And that is how chapter 4 ends.
My note here is, yay, more adventure.
What would you say to Reepicheep? Hey... we got a lot of just cleaning up to do.
Yeah. There might be a war though, so you get to use your sword.
He'd be happy about that part.
Yeah,
but
he'd be like, war first, then we go on another adventure.
Well, I think this was the best chapter of the book so far that we've covered.
So far, pretty good.
Yeah, this is a really good chapter. And next chapter, did you even look at the title of next chapter?
I don't look until we record the episode.
Well, next time we're going to be back with chapter 5, and that chapter is called The Storm and What Came of It.
See, another good chapter title. Wouldn't you agree?
I think it's...
By that, just go ahead and say you don't agree and then talk yourself into it.
That's what I'm pausing. I'm learning to wait a second, actually think before speaking. And I'm realizing... I actually maybe do like... Here, this is a great book into the episode. Here I am at the end of the chapter just saying I didn't like this title. I think I do like this idea of... we know that a storm's going to happen, and we're going to find out the consequences of that storm, but we have no idea what else besides that. So it's kind of like a little... here's an inkling of what you can expect. So,
ooh, nice.
So
an inkling.
Yes. So why don't we go ahead and wrap up this episode? You want to do that, Phil? You want me to do it?
I'll do it.
All right.
This episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can listen to a bonus episode each month, along with the other rewards that we have available. Special thanks goes to Elias Dean for supporting us at the Cara Paravel level. Follow us into Narnia on our Twitter or Facebook pages. Do you have any feedback? Email us at the narniapodcast@gmail.com. Follow us into Narnia on our Twitter or Facebook pages. If you have any feedback, please email us at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 406-646-6733. We'd also appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts. This helps other listeners find the show and join our read-through. Please make sure to also subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast app. Also, make sure you have subscribed to the show in your favorite podcast app so you can wake up to a new episode every other Wednesday. Thanks for coming along on the journey, and we will be back next time with Chapter 5.
Chapter